All right, it is 11:05, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for those of you who are joining us today for another one of our workshops. Today, we're going to be focusing on letters of evaluation. So if you have any questions at any time, during our slide deck or presentation, feel free to, raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask our questions. We do have a portion at the end where you can ask us questions, so you can reserve it for them if you'd like as well. And then we'll also, this is being recorded. So if you, don't want to be recorded or don't give your consent, you can, watch the recording later. But by being here, you're kind of, giving your permission for us to be able to use this as a resource for those who aren't able to attend. And we'll also, share this slide deck with you later as well, so that you can use it as a reference. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I don't anticipate today's, presentation or workshop will take too long, because it is a little bit more brief and more focused on one topic of the application. But hopefully we'll have more time for questions then. Started. My name's Kenny. I'm a fourth-year medical student at UC San Diego School of Medicine, but I'm currently on a research year, and I'll be starting back up in June. My hometown, I've kind of lived in a lot of different places, but I would consider it probably Rose Park, which is in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then in kindergarten, I think, if I can remember that far back, I feel like I used to want to be a lawyer. And then at some point it transitioned to being a doctor. So that's where I am today. But Luthi, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, just welcome to everyone. Grateful you guys are here. My name is Luthi. I'm a first-year medical student here at the University of Utah. I grew up here in Salt Lake, so this has been my hometown, although I was born in Hawaii. But in kindergarten, I'm pretty sure it was a doctor back then. So luckily, I had a good dream and somewhat on my way there. So let's see.
Let's go ahead and get started with our presentation. So we talk about letters of evaluation, and I'm sure most of us are probably familiar with what they are, but they're letters that we send as part of our application to support our application that basically, kind of just highlight our personal qualities and unique characteristics, and basically, share with the people who are reviewing our applications, the admissions committees, why, supporting the reasons for why we want to become a physician and why we would be good at being a physician. So we'll get to choose who our letter writers are, and we'll talk a little bit more about what types of letters are required for your application. But that's kind of just the overall gist of what they're expecting in your application. And a common question, we get is when you should start asking. And Luthi and I will kind of share our experiences when it came to, getting letters of recommendations after we finish the presentation. But the more time you give yourself, I think the better. But I think the rule of thumb is, as long as you ask about 2 to 3 months before you plan on submitting your application, I think that's a pretty good timeline. So if you plan on submitting your application in June, which is typically when applications are open and ready, you're able to submit your AMCAS application, then you should probably ask at the beginning of April. So if you're going to be applying this year, it's not too late to ask. But I think just ask as soon as you can. And the reason for that is, professors or whoever you're asking, they're busy with their own jobs and have a lot of other responsibilities and have a lot on their plate. So you want to be sure to give them enough time out of courtesy, but also, for them to be able to write a strong letter and really give time to think about how to write the letter so that it's specific for you. You want to give them as much time for that as well. If you ask them, and give them just a couple weeks, then it may just be a generic letter and may not be as strong as what you're looking for your application. Want to go ahead, Luthi?
Yeah, so in regards to how many do you need or who should be writing these letters, a good rule of thumb that I think I had when I was applying med school is about 5. 5 is probably a good minimum that you should probably have. It kind of varies for each med school, and so that's something you would want to check their website. You want to check AMCAS when you're applying and what they are looking for each school specifically. But if you follow this rule of thumb, it should be pretty decent. The letters that these should include, though, like on the academic side, you'll need 2 letters from science professors. Like this could be chemistry, biology. I had one from a physics teacher. It's like generally just a two from science professors. These two for me were like my biochem teacher and my physics teacher, and then one letter from a university but a non-science professor. You also want two letters that are non-academic, and one is just from like a mentor of yours, like someone. For me, I got it from my boss, who I worked for all throughout my undergrad, and I built a really good relationship with him. He was actually a really good friend of mine from high school. Well, I was good friends with his son in high school, and I worked for him throughout undergrad, and so he knew me for a while, and he wrote me a really good letter. And the other non-academic letter that you want would be a letter from a doctor that you've built a relationship with, through shadowing, or if you work for a doctor in undergrad, etc. The one thing I did include with this though is if you're going to apply to an MD school, you want to have a letter from an MD doctor, and if you are going to apply to DO schools, you want a letter from a DO doctor. And it's not that big of a deal, but those schools are kind of particular sometimes, and they want to see that you're shadowing a doctor that came from the same, kind of school, and they want to see the recommendation from that kind of doctor. So just keep that in mind. But if you have those 5 letters, you should be pretty fine with most schools. On my second point, though, I just want to let you know, like, it's okay, and it's probably encouraged for you to have more than 5 of these letters. The reason being, as you start applying, you'll see that each school kind of looks for their own. Each school kind of has like their own culture that they are looking for in students that they're accepting. For some schools, like for example with the U, they really love like teamwork and team building and people who could really work well with professors, etc. So a lot of the letters that I submitted to you included letters that I included a letter from my job, and he just talked about how well what I contributed to the job site, and how I made my team better around me, what I did better to build a team around me, etc. So it's super encouraged that you have more than 5, so that you can really customize which letters you send to which school to really build up your resume for what they're looking for. And so keep that in mind as you go throughout undergrad, or and keep that in mind as you look for who is going to write these letters for you. And the third thought I just want to let you know, like, that these people really should know you. They shouldn't just be like last minute, hey, I'm applying to med school. I know I took your class like 4 years ago. Will you write this letter for me so I can get into med school? You can do that, but it's tough because that professor really can't really say much about you, and it'll show. Even you won't be able to see that letter, but it'll show when the med school reads that letter that professor is kind of just saying really generic things, that they don't really know you. So make sure these people know you. Make sure that they appreciate your strengths, that they cherish like everything that you bring to them, to your guys' relationship, to the team that you were in, research, work, as a class, etc. Just whatever it is. And then this one is kind of a hard question for me to really, I guess, dissect. When you're asking for these letters, I feel like there's different ways to do it, but in kind of like just step fashion, I felt like the primary thing that you need to do is just build a relationship with them. Like I said, like, these people should know you. So start from the very beginning. Just know that every person that you would want a letter from, like, build a relationship with them. Show them that what you can contribute, and why they should, or why they would want to write a letter for you. In my personal experience, I actually really enjoyed asking in person to get a letter, and sometimes that's not possible, so that's totally understandable. But if you can, and it might be weird, awkward, different situation for you, whatever, but I felt like asking in person really showed that professor in front of you that it really means a lot for you to go up to them, take time out of your day to go see them, and ask them in person for a letter recommendation. And I think Kenny has some tips later, but some general tips for now is just don't act entitled. Like, you're going to them for their help, and I don't think we'll have that many problems with you guys in this group here. But there's been some people I've seen, like, when they ask for letters of recommendation, they kind of act entitled, like they deserve it because of all the work they did. But just be grateful, be straightforward that you do want a letter of recommendation, but be sincere and pleasant when you talk to them, and smile more than anything. Like, I think it's a lot easier to ask for a letter of recommendation, and it's a lot easier to get one when you're somebody that is pleasant to talk to more than anything. Do you guys have any questions as of now? You guys are good for so far? Okay, so with this last part, in regards to where you send these letters, I didn't know this before when I was applying to med school, and so I just want to quickly just put this in here. But when you are asking for a letter recommendation, med schools don't want you to know what's in that letter. So because if you know what's in that letter, then these professors are kind of pressured to say good things about you and say, like, you're kind of pressuring them to tell good things about you, and to maybe come up with lies about how awesome you are. So because med schools don't want to see that, you actually have to ask through different services. And there's some services down here, but by asking through these services and requesting these letters through different services allows for your writer to send their letter directly to the med school, and you never get to see it, and no one else will see it except for the med school and the professor who wrote it, or the person you asked to write it. So that's the kind of services that you're going to go to submit these letters. There's AAMC, which is the AMCAS. They have these services, and you can go to them to have these services to transfer letters. There's things called like interfolio.com. I personally didn't use either of these. I actually had at my university at BOU, they had their own personal letter tracker service, I guess you could say. And it was free, it was available, and I just logged in and requested letters from certain people. I think, and Kenny told me that his school did the same thing. So I think most universities have this available for most of their students. And I would suggest to go ask your university where you can find that resource if you need to do it through them. If you can't, there are other resources like the ones I listed as well. But these are the places where you want to go, after when you ask them for a letter, when you request it and you build that relationship, these are the places you're going to want to go so you can request a private letter from them to that university.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, so you can you can have your letter writer submit their letters directly to the AMCAS, but they'll only be able to do that once you start your application. And so these letter services that Luthi was referencing to are useful because you can request a letter at any time, and the letter writer can send it to that letter service at any point, whether you've started your application or not. These letter services, third party through Interfolio or your university, will store your letters until you're ready to, submit your application. And then once you're ready, there's like a code and a way to transfer it from your school or from Interfolio to your AMCAS application directly. And different schools require different letters sometimes. So that's why we recommend looking, whatever schools you're interested in, make sure you read the requirements thoroughly. And that's why it's good to have variety, so that you can make sure you meet all the requirements as far as letters of recommendation for the schools that you're applying to. And for those of you who didn't attend our workshop for the general overview of applying to medical school, one of the useful tools that many of us have used to look at different medical schools and compare them, look at their statistics as far as like average GPA or average MCAT score for people who have been accepted into school, race, ethnicity, whatever, and specialties that people end up going into. The tool is called MSAR, MSAR, and I can include it in the chat after, but it's a really useful tool. They provide a free subscription, but it's limited. And if you pay a certain amount, I forget the amount, I think it's like $25 or $30, then you have more access to more information from the different schools. And it's just a really good way to be able to check everything for different schools that you're considering applying to. Cool. And just to wrap up, like Luthi said, I think the most ideal way to request a letter is to ask for a meeting in person and ask them, face to face. But if for whatever reason it's not possible to have a meeting with them or meet with them, although these days Zoom makes it a little bit easier, one way that you can do it is by sending them an email. And the tips that I have here are kind of a general tips for how to compose your email. There's some email etiquette in requesting letters from your professors or research mentors. But even maybe before delving into the specifics and some of these recommendations, first asking if they would be open to even writing you one. And then if they say yes, then maybe include some of these points. But just some things to keep in mind, if possible, use your university email. So your .edu, try not to use your personal email account, just because it makes it seem a little bit more, professional. And then some things to include in your first paragraph, just your name, introducing yourself. And if it's a professor you're requesting the letter from, make sure you include what course you took and what grade you earned in their course, just so that they, kind of refreshes their memory. And then also make sure that you state the purpose of your letter. So in this case, you'd be asking them, like you're asking them for a letter of recommendation because you're applying to medical school. And then also be sure to specify, that you're looking for a strong or supportive letter of rec. And I know that may seem like, why would you, why would you need to specify? But I know there have been some circumstances where people don't specify. And the audacity of some letter writers to then even proceed and write letters that aren't supportive or negative letters even. I've heard of stories where professors have done that. And another reason why you want to put strong or supportive is, if a professor doesn't feel comfortable, like maybe they're like, I don't really know you that well, and I feel like I couldn't provide you a strong letter of recommendation for your application, then that would work to your benefit, because then you would want to, move on to someone else instead of just getting a, kind of a mediocre letter of recommendation from them. And another important thing you want to include is the due date. Make sure you say that at the beginning, and also you'll see here in the last paragraph to remind them of the due date, just so that they can, make sure they're giving themselves enough time for that. Other things you'll want to include is to, ask them specifically why you're requesting one from them, whether for science letters, sometimes it's hard because the courses are a lot bigger, but maybe you went to office hours, or maybe they had like a special, honors course for where you had to do a little bit more work, but that was an opportunity for you to, get to know them a little bit better. It just helps paint a better picture of your guys' relationship and why you're asking them specifically. And also share a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in medicine. Maybe you've had this conversation with them beforehand and they really know you, but if they don't, kind of just give a brief synopsis of your goals in medicine, and be specific, because like we've been reiterating, you want these letters to be strong letters, and the more specific they are to you, the experiences you've had with this letter writer, the better off you'll be. Third paragraph, if you feel like there's any information that they don't already know about you, or, this is an opportunity for you to kind of hint at what you want them to include in your letter, maybe include some extracurricular activities or, other things that you're passionate about. I would also include that there. But I think the overall thing is just be mindful and be concise when you're writing this letter. You don't want this email. You don't want it to be too long, because no one likes reading a long email. And then the last paragraph, I would just recommend including the details. So like, where does this letter need to go to? So for these different letter services we talked about in the previous slide, oftentimes, you'll go to interfolio.com, for example, you'll include the professor's email, and then the interfolio will send an email to the professor. So this would be an opportunity to be like, hey, keep an eye out for an email from Interfolio with, more information, more instructions on how to submit your letter. Remind them of the due date. And then if there's any other additional forms that they need to fill out, also be able to also include that. And then some helpful things, you don't have to include all of these, but some helpful things to include in an email for requesting letters is like your CV or your resume, so that they can see, what you've done, what you've accomplished, and this will help them write a better letter of recommendation for you. If you have your personal statement ready, sometimes people will request it from you so that they can write a better letter that's more specific to you. And then the AAMC core competencies, I wasn't aware of this actually until, more recently, but they're basically core skills and qualities and values or characteristics, whatever you want to call them, that the AAMC is looking for in entering medical students or students applying to medical school. So, the reason why I say that this might be something useful to submit in your email is because, when your letter writer is writing, they could look at these core competencies and maybe speak to them, so that, it looks good when medical school admissions committees are reviewing your letters. So hopefully that was helpful in terms of how to write your emails. But yeah. So that was kind of the slides that we had prepared for today. Like I said, we will share these with you so you can use them as a reference. but we wanted to, give you some time if you had any to ask us any questions that you had. I know that there were some that people submitted. Let me see, let me pull it up real quick. When they were registering for this workshop, and Luthi and I can answer some of them. So one of them was, if you could redo, change, or enhance your strategy when applying to medical school, what would it have been? You want to start off, Luthi?
Yeah, I could. In regards, I think especially in regards to letters of recommendation, I think that was an area that I probably could have improved on. Um, in my experience, I had a hard time connecting. I felt like I had, really good letters of recommendation for most people, but those science professors I felt like was really tough for me to really connect with. I felt like I asked them in a good timing, like timing wise, it was good and everything. I feel like I did well in the class, but it was really tough for me to connect with them, and build that relationship with them. And I don't know if that's a common thing, and I don't know if you guys are experiencing that, but that's something I would have strengthened, going through my undergrad. I've talked to a lot of friends and how they would have done that better, and office hours are always like, a top option to do that, and going in office hours and just talking with them, telling them things that you're struggling with, and just seeing their advice. Sometimes you don't even know, like, the right questions to ask them to really, get better in their class. But if you just go in, there was a couple of professors, where I just went in, I'm like, I feel like I'm struggling with this and this and this. I don't know what to ask you, but I just came in to see what you thought, what could I improve on, what things could you help me with, and just opening yourself up like that really helped me build relationships with some professors. And I wish I did that earlier with more of my scientific professors, because those letters of recommendations were one of the harder ones for me to find. And luckily it worked out, just fine for me. But that's a piece of advice that I would give to anyone if they are having specific hard times with their, scientific letters of recommendation and their professors.
Yeah, I'd have to second that. Science letters of recommendation are always challenging to get. The courses are always big. Like for the school that I went to, the intro classes were like 300 plus students. So it's like, how do you, ask this professor for a letter of rec? How do you build a relationship? But office hours is honestly the best way to start. Come prepared, have a question or two just so that they can see you and, recognize your face. Honestly, the other thing about that's beneficial about attending office hours outside of just building a relationship and asking for letters of rec is, you sometimes there's research opportunities out of, building relationships with professors. And I know that's another challenge, or a challenge that I had in undergrad, was finding research. But building relationships with your professors through office hours, I think, is the best advice. And then in terms of just overall strategy, I think I probably would have just started preparing sooner. I didn't know anyone who went to medical school, and I wasn't sure what to expect. And so things were very just, last minute for my application. You can submit applications in June, and most people do submit right when you can. So they've prepared all their materials and just click submit on June 1st. But I didn't submit my application until like September, I think. So, and I feel like I cut myself short on some opportunities in terms of, admissions to different schools. So I would definitely say prepare all the materials beforehand and apply as soon as you can. Don't wait to the last minute. Although it's possible, you don't want to short yourself of any opportunities. The next question was, how do you ask for letters of recommendation if you're going into a gap year? Did you take a gap year, Luthi? Okay, so Luthi went straight through. I took a gap year, but it was only 1 year. So the recommendation is to ask like, a couple months before you apply. So I asked, I think that April or May of my senior year. And, and that was the year that I was applying. But if you're planning on taking more than that, what I would say is, reach out to your letter writers at your school and tell them that you're planning on taking some time off, and let them know that you would like, them to write a letter for you in the future. And then, keep in touch with them as frequently as possible. And then when the time comes, that's a couple months before you apply, that's the time to get the letter. Only because I don't think that, letters that are 2 years old or even a year old are recommended. You want letters that are, relevant, that are recent. And so I think the best thing is just to let them know that you're going to take some time off and that you'll be asking them, in the future, if they can write a letter for you. Did you have anything else for that, Luthi?
I think we're good there.
Cool. And the other question we got, which I think we kind of already touched on, was how to get letters of recommendations from science professors when you are only in lecture halls. Yeah, I think office hours or even emailing them maybe to set up a time specifically to meet with them to discuss, the course or whatever is kind of the best approach for science professors. And I think as you get up to your like upper division courses, if you are a science major, it becomes a little easier because the classes are a lot smaller. And so you get to, have one more time with your professors, but office hours, I think, is the best. Cool. I think those are all the questions that were submitted before the workshop. But I definitely want to give you all an opportunity if you have any regarding letters of recommendations or just anything relating to medical school, applying to medical school. That's
I
what
have a question.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Piggybacking on what you were just talking about the office hours and going in, I was wondering how one would, because if I went to office hours, I would just go and ask my question and leave. But I'm wondering how you should go in, ask, and then somehow turn the conversation to become something more personable, like get to know you and get to know them better.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's always challenging because you're in a group setting, when you go to office hours, it's not just you and the professor. And so I'm glad you asked that because I wouldn't recommend probably having a personal conversation during office hours when everyone is there. I think the purpose of being present at office hours is just so that the professor's familiar with your face and familiar with who you are so that when you ask later on, and say, hey, I'm asking for a letter of rec. This is what I did in your class. This is the grade that I got. They're like, oh yeah, I remember you because you came, you asked quite thoughtful questions, you engaged in the discussions and conversations that were there. And, outside of just, getting to know the professor during office hours, I think office hours are generally useful because of the questions that people are asking. And it's a good way for you to, to learn as well. But yeah, I would say save the personal conversations about, you and your aspirations in applying to medical school for maybe more one-on-one meeting with your professors.
Just a little advice too. I found that it helped me with a couple of professors. Something that really helped me, like maybe get to that level where I could speak to them one-on-one was, even during office hours, if I just happened to be the only student in there, a question that sometimes I would ask was like, hey, professor, I'm kind of here to talk to you about school. I'm also here to just talk to you. I would hope to get a letter of recommendation from you one day. And I'd just be straight up with them. It was kind of nice to, build that expectation up front with them and be straightforward. And then they kind of realized that I wanted to build a relationship with them enough to where they would write me a letter. And so throughout the semester, as I start the conversation off with them, maybe the first time I get to speak with them one-on-one, they kind of knew to just look for things for me, look out for who I am personally as we go throughout our semester so that they can write a good letter of recommendation at the end of the semester. Now, some professors might not be, that best of person to tell them up front that that's what you want, but I think it could help, really break down that first wall so that they can really want to get to know you personally. That might be a good tip with some people. And I just say kind of just feel out the relationship with each professor, but that might be a good tip for you.
No, that's a really great point, Luthi. It's something that I didn't do and something that I'm learning now. I'm applying to residencies this upcoming year. And so for just like many of you, I'm going to have to ask for letters or recommendations again. And one good point that Luthi brought up is setting expectations and be mindful of who you do this with. But if you can ask them before, you finish the course and let them know that this is what you're looking for, that's even better. Because then you can get the expectations from the professor. They may say, okay, well, this is what I'm looking for. You need to do this well in my class. And then that way they'll write you a really, really strong letter. But yeah, it's a hard skill, maybe sometimes an uncomfortable conversation to have with professors, but it's a really good skill to work on. And if you, like Luthi said, if you feel like this is the right professor to ask and ask them early, then definitely do it. Let's see, someone messaged, when you mentioned getting letters of recommendations from science professors, does it have to be from BCPM course, or do health and social science professors count? I'm assuming BCPM says biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. And yes, when it comes to science letters of recommendations, it has to be one of those. So like health or social sciences would count as a non-science letter of rec. I think for a science letter, though, it doesn't have to be, it has to be science related. So I think one of my letters came from like, I did a pretty research heavy major, and one of the courses was like a genetics lab. And that was where I got one of my science letters from. Great questions. Did you all have any other questions for us? Hopefully this was useful.
I did have one question. I just wanted to go back to what you said with the earlier about like knowing the culture of the schools so you can kind of select letters that you think would enhance that application. Other than the MSAR, how did you kind of figure out what the culture of the school was and kind of craft your application to fit well into that?
Good question, Livia. Honestly, I think when I was in my application process, I would go into the schools that I researched, like when I looked up at the U, or when I looked up schools like in Oregon or whatever. On their main page, they have, typical values that they list that their school has, and that their school value, their values that they want their students, that they want their professors, that they want their university to uphold. And those were the kind of things that I kept looking for in each school. And so when I knew what their values were, some people's values were research, and some people's values were like, we really value that we're top in family care practice, and we are really, we really connect with our patients, and we want people who can connect and make patients feel unique, et cetera. Like, obviously each med school wants that, but each med school on their homepage will select a few of those values and really highlight those. So if you can find out each med school that does that, and what they're really looking for in their students in their application, like they're telling you straight up like what they want to see in a student's application. So you get to know those med schools, and then you can kind of craft which letters you have to go to them. If a school doesn't really care about research, like maybe don't send them the research letter, because they only want to see like 4 to 5 letters from each student. You can't just send them, all 12 of your letters. They honestly might just reject you because they don't want to read all that. So you really want to send them what they really want to see. If they're not a really big school in research, maybe your research professor letter is not the important one to send to them, and that's okay, because other schools will love research, and they really will want to see what you've done with your research professor. Does your professor really respect you? Okay, send that letter to them. Maybe send 2. I don't know. Maybe there's some schools. Maybe you have 2 people that you did research for, and that you could send those 2 letters to that school. And so that's kind of my whole point. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that's what I did, and I thought it really helped me in my applications.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll also add to that is on MSAR as well, and even on people, so you can go to the individuals schools websites. They generally have all the information there, but MSAR is nice because it's like a consistent format between all the schools, so it's easy to know like where to look for what. And they have the specifics for like what letters they're looking for there as well. They may not tell you exactly like what they're looking for in the letters. I think what Luthi was saying in terms of like the core values and mission statement for the school is kind of the best way to look for that. But they'll tell you like how many science letters, how many non-science. If they want a research letter, they'll, if they care, then they'll have that specified on their website or on MSAR.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions, you can always reach us through email. Our email is polynesiansinmedicine@gmail.com. or you can find us on Instagram or Facebook, and you can DM us there. The idea of holding these monthly workshops is, to create a space where we're, informing you all about these different aspects of application and to help bridge some of those gaps. But it's also just a space to, answer any questions that you have. But you can feel free to reach out to us at any time for any advice or things like that. But yeah, thank you for attending again. We hope to see you all at our next workshop next month. I think we'll be talking probably about personal statements. So great. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend.